Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we'll talk about exceptions in Java. As you have seen those slides that are uploaded in the UVT. Now what is an exception? An exception is an event that occurs during the execution of a program that interrupts the normal flow of control. So in general, in programming we have three types of errors. We have compilation error that we talked about all the time. This is the task of the compiler to find the syntax error, the compilation errors. Now the second type of errors is the runtime error. How to handle those runtime errors? We have something called exceptions in Java. The third type of errors is logical error. There is not much to do about it. This is the programmer task to find those logical errors. Now, the good thing about exception handling in Java that the program can continue executing after handling the exception rather than terminating. So this helps us to have a robust and fault-tolerant programs. Okay, so in this hierarchy, you can see the hierarchy of exception class. Now, exception class, as you can see here, extends throwable class that in turn extend the big ancestor class object that we have been always talking about. So, in the exception class that we are interested in, we have runtime exceptions and other type of exceptions like IO exception, like file not found exception. We talked about when reading from file. We have SQL exception that we will talk about in the database chapter, inshallah. Now, we have other thing, which is the error. Errors are too serious to catch, as you can see here. We mean by error serious system error, like thread death, like out of memory error. This is unlikely to happen, and when it happens, you don't have much to do. So that's why we don't advise you to catch those errors, because they don't happen frequently, and even if you catch it, then what can you do if you are out of memory? Like, you cannot do anything. So we will not catch those errors. Also, regarding runtime exception, those you may handle, but those are, we call them unchecked exception. What do you mean by unchecked exception? Java will not force you to handle those types of exception. You'd rather avoid them. Some example of runtime exception is arithmetic exception, which is dividing by zero, for example. We have null pointer exception when you point an object to null, so you may avoid that. It's better. We have also array out of bounds exception. We have seen that in strings and in arrays. Those types of exception, as a programmer, you are supposed to avoid them rather than handling them, but you may handle them if you want. Now, what we must handle, and Java forces us to handle, those we call checked exceptions. One example is the IO exception, which we talked about. We have file not found exception, which is a subclass from IO exception. So we have something here which is file not found exception. When you read from file, Java forces you to throw IO exception or file not found exception, either one of them. SQL exception is also a must to make sure that there is a good connection, proper connection with the database. Java forces you to throw this kind of exception. We have other examples. You may look at in the internet. Now, okay. Now we talked about the different types of exceptions we have in Java. Now how to handle them. We have three ways in order to handle those exceptions. Either claiming the exception or throwing the exception. Number three, which is mostly the case and the most proper way to handle exception, is by catching the exceptions. Okay, we will give some examples in NetBeans to make this more clear. So, let's start by this example. As you can see here, what do we have? We are trying to read from user a number supposed to be an integer. Now, if it is not a number, then we are throwing input mismatch exception. And then we are giving the user the option to enter another number. So this whole thing will be inside a do while loop. So let's try to run it. So as you can see here, enter an integer. Let me enter like an alphabet F, for example. Can you see here? Try again, incorrect input, an integer is required. So I will enter 10, so 10 will be printed. Now you can see how proper it is. We don't have like red lines. The program continued working properly and we have a robust program. Now let me comment those things and in order for you to see the difference. If we remove the catch, so here we are. I will remove the do and try as well. So we left with system enter an integer. I will read the integer. I will print it if possible. Now what if the user entered non-integer? He was playing by mistake, whatever. So let me do this. Can you see? It's improper. It's not appropriate to have this kind of output to the user. Can you see this? So we have red things. Okay, it will give you some guidance. As a programmer, we will be able to understand. So it will be printing input mismatch exception and it will show you the line, which is in this case this one. So as you can see the difference between when we catch the exception and when we just ignore it. So it's better to catch the exception. Now using try and catch, we are talking about the third option, which is catching exception. Now let us see the other things, which is claiming and throwing the exception. Let's move to another thing, which is this example. I believe you still remember this example. In this one, what we did in lab 4, which was regarding methods, when we tried to read from file, and then we have outputted the result to another file. So a gentle reminder for you. So we had this student file. It has student name and 5 grades. And what we are willing to do, as you can see in the output average, we are willing to output the name and the 5 grades in this format, then the average of each student, the grade, and finally the class average. Okay, in this class, we talked about throwing file not found exception. Now, since file not found exception or IO exception is a checked exception, what do you mean by that? Java forces you to throw this exception. So, in case you did not do it, can you see here? It will be unreported exception, file not found exception, must be caught or declared to be thrown. So, this will result in a compilation error. If you don't throw a checked exception in Java, it will result in a compilation error. So, it will force us to throw this exception. Using this simple statement, we are in which category? We are in claiming exception in number 1, the easiest one. And it does not take time. Okay, so let me try to do something like, let me put improper name. Something that does not exist. I don't have this file. And let's see what will happen now. So, in this case, it's true that an exception was thrown. As you can see here, file not found exception was thrown and it will show you the line as well. But also, it's improper. Like we are still seeing these red lines. It solved the problem. I can see some helpful information. However, I did not handle it properly. So what will be the alternative? We will add try and catch. So how to add them? Let's see. We will add try. It will be as a block. I will close it at the very end. So here I will close it. So I will try to open the file and do all my calculation if things went properly. Otherwise, I will write a catch block. So, which exception shall I catch? file not found exception. Also, you could use IO exception, by the way. Okay. I will add an object name in this case. This will give me more details about this error. I will show you now, inshallah. So, if there is this exception, I will simply print a message like saying what? Like couldn't find the file, for example, plus I will display the data returned from this object. Don't forget the semicolon. So let's see what will happen now. Very good. Can you see how proper it is? By the way, I have added to the end system.out.hello. Generally, when we are writing a code, we do so many things. In this case, I could read from file, output to another file, and then display some messages, like do some calculation, whatever you want to do. So if you handled in the previous case, when I just throw the exception, I couldn't see the message. So it displayed the exception for me, but the things did not go smooth. However, when I use try catch, which is handling my exception, everything will be proper. So you can see here, it displayed this message, couldn't find the file. So you can see here, couldn't find the file. Then this is the automatic message returned from this object X. So file not found exception, and the system cannot find the file specified. It will give you the path of your file and it will display the message. Then it will continue working. Perfect. And this is the most important thing regarding handling exception, because the program will be robust, I will continue working, and the message will be proper even for the user. No red lines and no stopping of the code. It will continue working properly. Okay, so this is regarding file not found exception. So as you can see here, when I add try and catch, I don't need to add this. You could, but you don't need to. Now, let's do something else. What if I put the proper name of my file, like this one? However, I will erase all the content of my file. So it will be an empty file. Now in this case, if you remember the code, I was trying to calculate the class average. So I will divide by number of students. In this case, after deleting the content of my file, the number of students will be 0. So I will end up dividing by 0. Let's see what will happen now. Can you see? Arithmetic exception, because dividing by 0, divide by 0. So this is the exception that I have. Okay, so that's why it's generally recommended to add, to addition to any of your exception, a general exception block. So what do you mean by general exception block? We will call it exception. Don't forget the diagram. In our diagram, we say that exception is the parent of all those exceptions. Runtime, IO, all of exceptions in Java are subclasses of exception. So it is recommended to add this general exception block to handle all the exceptions. So you will put the exceptions that you expect. For example, in this case, we have file not found exception, but maybe it does not come to your mind divide by 0 if your file is empty. So that's why, to be in the safe side, you will add this general catch handler exception. So in this case, like, I will print simply error, like, I don't know. And then, of course, I will display X. This is my object, so I will have further information. This will be useful for me as a programmer. I will understand what's going on. So in this case, perfect error, Java.lang arithmetic exception dividing by 0. So now I understand more. I have a better information. And also, I could continue executing my program, unlike when I did not have this block before. Now there is another thing we talked about in the slides. You can see it in the slides, the finally block. The finally block is just a simple block that will be executed no matter what. If you have an exception, if you handle it, if you did not handle it, anyway you will end up displaying or doing whatever is inside the finally block. So I will print, for example, finally, whatever. So let's see. So you have finally and you have hello. Even without this, without handling the dividing by 0, you will still see finally. Can you see? There is finally. But this one was not printed because that kind of exception was not handled in my program. Okay, long story, make it short. The finally block will be always executed no matter what. Now we have another thing, which is the last type that we did not talk about yet. We talked about claiming and we talked about catching the exception. The last type is we have claiming. Okay, sorry, where are we? Throwing. Here we are. So we have claiming, we have throwing and catching. So this is the last example regarding throwing an exception. So instead of using try and catch, we will simply throw an object of type exception, any exception you have. So in this case, I will be reading 2 integer from user. If y not equal to 0, I will do the division, else I will throw arithmetic exception cannot divide by 0. Let's see. So this is divide by 0. I will run it. So enter 2 integers. Let me enter 10 and 0. Okay, so here still it's not perfect. It's not like try and catch, the perfect way to handle exceptions as we said. However, I can see some helpful message that I have written myself as a programmer. So I have wrote here, I have sent to the constructor of arithmetic exception can divide by 0, which will be my message. So in this case, it was displayed cannot divide by 0 and some useful information from Java. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you very much and stay safe.